Economic War Room. How a lizard almost halted the shale revolution. Treasury bonds may be impacted by the energy boom. Oil delivery expert Troy Andrews. Regulation and the energy sector. Investment opportunities within the energy sector. And an exclusive economic battle plan. Now join Kevin Freeman in the Economic War Room.
It was almost Christmas in 2011. I remember I was in Washington. I was briefing agency after agency, talking about the threat of economic warfare, attacks on the dollar, and so forth. And I got on a plane and was seated next to someone I recognized, Congressman Mike Conaway from the Midland area, Texas congressman. And he and I had met just a few weeks earlier when we both were speakers at the Midland County Republican Women's meeting. I was the keynote and I had the opportunity to talk to him as a candidate afterwards. I shared a little about economic warfare, and there we were seated together on the plane. And he said, I've got to tell you a really scary version of economic warfare. There's about a 3-inch lizard in the sand dunes of Texas. In fact, some people call it the sand dune lizard, others call it the sagebrush lizard. But that little lizard was about to shut down the whole shale industry in the Permian Basin. Well, Congressman Conaway was worried. He was fighting a battle with the Fish and Wildlife Service and others who wanted to declare this little guy an endangered species. And what that would have done would have basically shut down all energy development. Now, fortunately, he was able to work out a deal, and we were able to keep fracking continuing in Texas, and we won the oil war that we've been talking about. But in 2011, it was in question. There was a little 3-inch, almost declared endangered species lizard that did it. You know, we use about 7 billion barrels of oil per year. At $200 a barrel, that would be $1.4 trillion. Well, the good news is the price of oil isn't $200 a barrel, but it would have been had we declared that little guy an endangered species. If you took the American shale industry off of global production, we'd have $200 a barrel oil, which means we would be spending an enormous amount of our wealth and treasure overseas. It'd be going to the Middle East. It would be doing what my friend Jim Woolsey once said, funding both sides of the war on terror. But because of the American shale development, oil is now about $70 a barrel, which means that our total energy bill for oil is about $500 billion per year, and much of that stays here at home. Because we've expanded our shale industry, oil prices are much, much lower, which means the price of gasoline, when you go to fill up your car, it starts in the $2 range and not the $6 range. A bottle of gasoline this size, if you strip out the federal and state taxes, costs about 25 cents. That's a remarkable deal if you think about it. You know, what do you pay, after all, for a bottle of water this size at the fair or a football game? This is a great deal, 25 cents. This much energy is so packed with energy that you can take a 4,000-pound vehicle, plus passengers, plus cargo, and move it about 4 miles down the road. That's an amazing story of energy. I mean, given a choice, I'm a dad with kids, pile my wife, the kids, the luggage in the car. Would I pay a quarter to go 4 miles, or would I want to push them in a wheelbarrow or something like that? This is a great amount of energy, and it's a great deal for the American consumer. And it's made possible because of the shale revolution. Now, we fought a war in 2014. Most of us didn't know we were fighting, but the Saudis knew it, the Russians knew it. They fought an oil war, and we covered all of that in our first part of this energy special. Today, we're going to be talking about the great deal we have with American energy, the challenges we have, but also the investment opportunities it's creating. We have about $500 billion being spent on energy. That's a huge opportunity for investors because we need a lot of infrastructure. We need a lot of capabilities to develop, transport, and use the energy in the American energy renaissance. Now, we're in a great position. In fact, we're probably in the most enviable position in the world because not only have we reduced our dependence on foreign oil, but we've begun to transport and sell and export oil. China, our primary opponent in this current economic war, they're not anywhere near the shape we're in. In fact, the Chinese are, according to the EIA, are now the #1 importer of oil. They've passed the United States, a crown that we've held for decades. China is now the most dependent on foreign oil of any nation. And that's pretty good news for us. Now, some of us may think, well, electric cars will eliminate Chinese demand for oil. That's actually not true. There's a quote in the Next Big Future. By the way, for those of you who think electric cars will eliminate the use of oil, Asian demand growth, particularly in China, should continue to increase oil demand far above current levels. Statistically, there are about 1 billion cars on the planet that use either gasoline or diesel, that have internal combustion engines. Looking out 20 years, there's going to be a huge increase in the use of electric cars, maybe 300,000 of them on the roads in 20 years. But there will be about 2 billion internal combustion engines. So the demand for oil for transportation is actually going to double worldwide over the next 20 years. That's why it is so absolutely essential that we support, invest in, and maintain the American shale industry. Now, it's not all good news. There are some negative implications. When we were the largest importer of oil, we had a ready buyer of treasury bonds, because starting about 1973, Henry Kissinger and President Nixon made a deal with Saudi Arabia that said, as you sell oil worldwide and we buy it, will you make certain that it's always sold in dollars, and will you make certain that since we're the largest buyer of oil on the planet, that when you get extra money, that you don't just stick it in the bank somewhere, you don't put it in other currencies, you put it back in US dollars. And so they were the largest buyer of treasury bonds. Now this is a problem for us because our debt has continued to increase and our dependence on foreign investments continue to increase. And that's something we will address in the economic war room. It's something you can help us with. We can fix this problem, but that's another problem for another day. Right now we're talking about oil. And oil is one of the largest supports for the dollar remaining the reserve currency of the world. And we know that Vladimir Putin has absolute intention of ending the petrodollar. In fact, March 2014, Voice of Russia, Russia's secret weapon, how to crash the US economy and stock market, here's what they said. They said, Russia is fully in control of the petrodollar and could cause the Dow Jones Industrial Average to plummet as it has never done before. One can wave the stars and stripes as long as one likes, but it's a fact that Russians can turn the US economy upside down. It's interesting to note that they made that boast in 2014 as they were attempting to crash our American shale industry. Now, Russia's also been working with Venezuela. They've been working with the Iranians. They want to end the US dollar as the world's reserve currency. They want to upend the global monetary system that's built on our Western financial system. And they're going to try it. And they're going to be joined by the Chinese, who in 2013 said, we have to de-Americanize the world. We have to end the use of the dollar in international transactions. Why? Every time they're buying a barrel of oil, they're paying for it in US dollars, which means they have to have access to dollars. It gives us a means of control. So they're going to be pushing hard on Saudi Arabia to no longer price oil in dollars, but to price it in Chinese yuan. In fact, they developed an entire futures market in Beijing that they call the petro-yuan. You know, if we have the petrodollar, they want the petro-yuan. And they've been pushing that direction. And they will be the largest importer of oil from Saudi Arabia and other places. And so they will be using their influence. And ultimately, the goal, if you trust Vladimir Putin and his KGB buddies, the goal is to remove the dollar and to crash America. Well, that's kind of what they would like to do. The good news is that as we become energy independent, we have a greater shot at preserving and protecting and defending the American economy. We don't want to lose the dollar as the reserve currency of the world. It would cause a serious fiscal crisis. It would have massive interest rate increases, devastating military cuts. But if we work together and build up our domestic energy industry, that's actually going to strengthen the dollar worldwide, not weaken it. All in all, I would rather be energy independent and growing even if it is a tiny threat to the dollar. We should take this as a wake-up call to address our dependence on foreign debt as much as we've addressed our dependence on foreign oil. We no longer should fund both sides of the war on terror. Now, good news overall, the United States is now the world's #1 producer of both oil and natural gas. Just the state of Texas alone would rank #3 in the world behind Russia and Saudi Arabia. And we have a lot of additional energy that we can develop on federal lands. For example, offshore energy has been cut off from us. 94% of federal offshore acreage is currently off limits to development, but a lot of that's coming up for review. We're talking tens of billions of barrels of oil, and we're talking trillions of cubic feet of natural gas. America is energy rich, and we've got to take advantage of that. So what can we do as a nation? We can continue to drill, drill, drill. Exports will help shore up the dollar, but we have to prevent politicians from killing the golden goose by sticking in excessive regulation or attempting to stop the energy boom. We've got to stop that. We did a whole story on congressional compromise where foreign interests were showing their ability to influence Congress. You need to watch that. It's in the Economic War Room. Next thing we should do as a nation is we've got to build out our incredible energy infrastructure. We've got a lot of opportunity to develop oil offshore, onshore, all around, but we have to get it to where it needs to go so that we can transport it either to exports or for use here at home. And then, of course, we've got to get our fiscal house in order. We can no longer depend on foreign debt. Our enemies have been funding our debt, and we've got to fix that. We're going to prepare for a multipolar world, but America can remain the leader. And with your help, and if we can hang on, the ride might get a little wild, but we can make a huge difference. And so because of that, we brought Troy Andrews into the Economic War Room recently. And we want you to understand the complex energy infrastructure we need, the challenges the government puts in the way, the challenges foreign countries put in the way of us developing our energy infrastructure, but the huge opportunities that are created for all of us to invest in America and invest in our future. So let's take a look at what Troy Andrews had to share with us. Welcome, Troy. We got the map here, and I want you to help us understand across the country where the energy is being produced, where it's located now, and where it needs to go so that we can use it in our American economy. So come with me to the board.
Yeah. Well, Kevin, interestingly enough, the shale revolution that we talk about has really caused a lot of issues as it's grown because of the infrastructure and the lack thereof. You need to have infrastructure for gas takeaway, for raw gas takeaway, which in raw gas, I mean, it's got all the heavy liquids in it, it's unprocessed, but you also have to have the processing. You have to take away the NGLs one direction. They have different markets. The gas has different markets. And the crude has to go predominantly to the Gulf Coast or to the refining markets. So the shale revolution has created a situation in our country where there's a great deal of infrastructure that needs to be built from really just greenfield. So if we want to talk about some of the areas we can point out.
Start by showing me where is the energy we're pulling out of the ground. Where's it located?
So obviously the Permian that Jackie talked about earlier, Jackie Pick, the Permian Basin is predominantly
right in here.
In this area here, goes up into New Mexico, comes all the way down through Texas.
And this alone, we heard, would be the third largest producer of energy in the world if it were a standalone nation.
Yeah,
which is shocking.
It's crazy. There's something like 27 benches that they've identified, and of basically, when you think about it, it's not coal seam methane, but it's the seams of natural gas and coal and energy that's beneath the ground that we never thought we could get at before.
Huge powerhouse. All right, but this is just one of the shale plays.
One. The Bakken Shale up here in North Dakota is another large one. As you can see, it's a long distance away from the infrastructure that's traditional in our country. It's a long way from the Gulf Coast.
Yeah, they're not driving massive amounts of cars through North Dakota. The refineries they're not there.
There's one refinery that's been there for a long time. There's another couple of tea kettle refineries that are fairly small.
But the bulk of it has to get shipped out of North Dakota.
Exactly. The bulk of it has to get down to the refining complex that's predominantly in the Gulf Coast.
So down in here.
Yeah, and then there's also some refining out here, and there's some refining on the East Coast, and so a lot of the rail goes both directions, and so a lot of it gets railed to both East and West Coast as well as the Gulf Coast.
Okay, so those are two big plays. Where else are we producing oil and gas?
Well, you got the Barnett Shale. It's becoming a little more crude oil that's coming from the Barnett Shale, but it's been mostly a gas play. But it's kind of
somewhere
down
in here.
Yeah, in that area
it
there.
It touches Dallas, Fort Worth, and okay.
Yeah, it kind of goes down and from Oklahoma all the way down. Then you've got the Utica Shale, which is in Ohio.
Was that in Ohio?
And then you've got the Marcellus Shale that's in Pennsylvania.
Which part
predominantly.
Of Pennsylvania, right?
Just it's
right in the middle. Okay.
Yeah, and those are big shale plays. You also have the Niobrara Shale is kind of up in here, and you've got a lot of gas that comes out of the Colorado Basin.
So let's just put this one right there.
Yeah, you can just kind of put it into this area, kind of right here.
Okay.
And so those are big shale plays. There's also other shale plays around the country, but these are predominantly the big shale plays that most people are talking about right now.
And there will probably be new ones discovered because the technology just continues to increase. Our ability to find it, our ability to extract it just continues to increase. So there will be lots of others. But right here, if I understood you correctly, much of this energy that's here is going to need to get here.
Yeah. I mean, and just so you understand too, a lot of the industry is focusing on the crude oil because that's the most value. We have a ton of gas right now, and if you look at North Dakota in particular, trying to get the gas out of North Dakota, there just isn't a tremendous lot of value to it once it, because you have to pay so much to get it to market. I mean, the largest value propositions in the gas are really the propane and butane, and you've got to get that predominantly down into Conway, Kansas market, and then the Gulf Coast market at Bellevue, and it's got to be processed. So once you process it and transport it all the way down, it takes a lot of the value out of the molecule. So those are the things that the industry's had to really deal with. Is the price of gas is relatively low. Right. Like Jackie talked about before, we're becoming a net exporter of gas.
And where does it export through?
The Gulf Coast.
Down here.
Yeah.
So it has been in the past. Where was the oil? If you bring in oil from Venezuela, it's going to come into the Gulf refineries, right?
Right.
And it's going to go to Houston and those areas. Yeah. And so we're bringing in oil. We're no longer needing to bring that in. We're bringing some in through Mexico, some in through Canada, but we're producing most of it here in the United States.
Right.
And now we've got to get it there. It's one thing to bring it in by ship. Mm-hmm. Here, it's another thing to bring in what's the efficient way to do that? How do we get, like you've been working in the North Dakota area, what's the most efficient way to get that?
Obviously pipelines.
Pipelines.
And the pipelines are the most efficient. I mean, people talk about pipeline spills, and they talk about, they want to remember that, but they don't ever really think about the statistics behind it. Because really, pipelines move millions and millions and millions of barrels of oil compared to like a rail car that's moving 720 barrels of oil on a rail car.
Right. Tell us the story of what took place. You had idea, you got money, then what happened?
Okay, so essentially, I've always been focused on the gas and NGL side. That's how I kind of started up in the North Dakota business, because there was a tremendous lack of infrastructure. It needed to come out of the ground with the crude oil. Crude oil can be trucked. You can't really truck raw gas around. You got to deal with it. You got to build infrastructure. So it's a little more stable in that regard. So that's kind of where I started focusing. Was you want to work with the commodity that needs pipeline infrastructure in order to move. So we started developing a project to build a pipeline that would actually cross the Native American lands into an area of North Dakota called McKenzie County, where there was a tremendous amount of drilling, a lot going on, very little infrastructure. There was no tie between anything north of the lake was not tied to anything south of the lake. There was just no pipeline infrastructure. The only way to get there was to come across the Native American lands. So I put together a relationship with the tribe, and I wanted them to be a part owner in the pipeline project that I was putting together, because it would benefit the tribe. And I felt like, there could be a good partnership there.
It's the right thing to do.
Yeah, it's the right thing to do. You're crossing the land. So we put together that JV joint venture. We started our company, Paradigm Energy Partners, at the time. We had just a few partners that we had. We got financial backing, and we started to try to permit our project and work on bringing on a partner. We were able to get a partner, and Phillips 66 ended up being our partner in the project. And
so let's stop a second.
Okay.
Imagine no regulatory issues whatsoever. You're able to day one go. How many days out before you complete?
Okay, so in essence, we had to deal with a lot of government agencies in order to build this pipeline. So not only are we building on, just what would you consider state lands or just private landowners, but we were going across a Native American tribe, and we also were crossing a body of water.
So you get the Corps of Engineers.
Yeah, so we got the Corps of Engineers involved. So the first thing you have to do is figure out, okay, what are all the permits and things that I have to do in order to build this pipeline? We sat down with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. It took almost 2 years to get that permit. And part of it was just the Corps didn't really know what exactly their process was, and then they changed.
Took 2 years to get a permit.
Yeah.
To do what?
To actually bore underneath the lake.
How long did it take to bore underneath the lake?
45 days.
Took 2 years in permitting and discussion and argument for a 45-day project.
Right.
But that was a pretty big project. I mean,
it was at the time when we were conceiving it. It was a world record bore.
You were it was bore more than anyone ever in distance.
In distance, it was
than anyone ever.
It was 11,600 feet.
2 miles.
2 miles.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So you're going to go under a lake 2 miles, which is a world record.
Yeah.
You could do it in 45 days, highly efficient, but it takes 2 years to get permits.
It took 2 years to get the permit, and then we had to get a NEPA, which is the National Energy or Environmental Policy Administration. We had to get a NEPA document done with the U.S. Army Corps, and then we also had to do one with the Bureau of Indian Affairs. So we had 2 NEPA documents that we had to do. We had to deal with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife, Bureau of Land Management, the Forestry Service. We had to deal with.
You're endangering any species here?
Well, there is a protected species of butterfly called the Dakota skipper. And butterfly. We had to route our pipeline around any areas that could be Dakota skipper habitats.
So you have to add pipeline and go right around a butterfly.
Yeah, well, we had to go around anything that might be their habitat.
Okay, so here's the obvious question: if your pipeline doesn't exist, how does that energy get transported?
So the energy, the crude oil itself is getting trucked, which, as we know,
it's going to kill butterflies.
The grills on the front of these trucks are probably full of butterflies.
And a pipeline that goes underneath a lake, how many butterflies, once it's in there, is it going to kill?
It's never going to kill any butterflies after that.
Okay.
So.
All right, so these are the kind of things that we deal with.
It is.
This is the vulnerability from an economic warfare perspective that we have. You've got Putin who says, I don't want America energy independent, and therefore I've got to stop them. He's not going to be able to come in and bribe you guys to not build your pipeline. He's not going to be able to get the Congress, but he might be able to get an environmental group to stand up on behalf of a butterfly, and he'll be laughing all the way in Moscow. If you would, I'd like you to come over and show exactly where your pipeline is. Let's come over to the table and show us where the pipeline that you built really is located.
Okay. So if I zoom in here on North Dakota, and you can see the peninsula here. Yeah. So the pipeline essentially crosses right here at the most narrow point on the peninsula, as you can see there. The pipeline, it terminates over here off of the reservation at Johnson's Corner, which I think you can see kind of on the map.
Yeah, there's Johnson's Corner right here.
Yeah. So
right. And where does it start?
And it actually is bi-directional, so it flows both directions. So if I come up here north, and you see Stanley there in the map right here, that's where the pipeline begins. We've got a rail terminal over here near Palamo, and we have a line that comes over, but it goes up to Stanley, to Palamo, and then all the way down.
This is a massive project.
Yeah, it's 95 miles of pipeline all in. The main line is 72 miles. It's a 16-inch, and then we put 2 bores underneath the lake, one for gas and one for crude.
Now, is there any risk of energy seeping into the lake?
Man, very, 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 very small, because we're 100 feet below the bottom of the lake.
100 feet below the bottom.
It's a 700-foot drop from one side of the lake to the other side. So it's 700 feet down and 700 feet back up. It goes beneath 100 feet below the bottom of the lake, both pipelines. The one we think is about 120 feet below the gas line. And
so it's pretty unlikely that energy seepage is going to get into the lake at all.
Well, the technology people don't realize is tremendous. I mean, a lot of times, you put a steel pipe in, it's coated. It's got a special epoxy coating that we put on it that's scratch resistant, and then we also put electric charges on the pipeline on both sides, and so you can tell if there's any anomalies in the line, and if you have any kind of rust or corrosion or any of those sorts of things, you're going to start losing electricity in between.
Okay, so you can measure it and monitor it.
Yeah.
And you no doubt tested it extensively.
Oh, yeah. And it's also a 1/2-inch steel pipeline, so it's much thicker than it needs to be, probably 2 or 3 times thicker than it needs to be. And then how
much energy is going to go through this?
Oh, well, we can probably move without, obviously you can add more pumping power to get more through, but at its current status, it can probably move 160 to 180,000 barrels a day. The gas side can probably move 220 million cubic feet a day.
That's a lot.
It's a lot. It can move a lot of energy.
And we need projects like this all across the country.
Yeah. I mean, the Dakota Access Pipeline actually connects into Johnson's Corner. It goes all the way around the lake because they didn't want to go the same route that we did. They went all the way around. And then it goes all the way south. So we actually connect into Dakota Access at Johnson's Corner. And Dakota Access was being built about the same time. And when we talk about protesting and all that was going on, let me just kind of give you a little bit of maybe some insight on that. And that is that when we did our project, one of the benefits to the tribe was that we hired tribal contractors to build our pipeline. So we had a lot of tribe members that were working on building it. And at the end of the pipeline, when it was finally built and done, obviously they either move on to the next project, but if there isn't a project, then they're kind of out of work until the next project. Well, some of the contractors that were working on the pipeline that were native contractors didn't have anything to go to their next project. So they actually went down and protested the Dakota Access Pipeline and were paid to do so.
Wow. That was their job. It wasn't a matter of they really were genuinely opposed to it. It's like, oh, this is
let's build our pipeline, and then went and protested that pipeline.
So they must like pipelines, yeah.
Well, I mean, the crazy thing is and what the news media doesn't like to show is when the protest was over and they finally all left, they were in a flood zone, and it was all U.S. Army Corps controlled land, flood zone that they were protesting in. And they were on private property that are owned by the U.S. Army Corps. When they left, it took 400 semi-loads to get all the garbage that they left behind. 400 semi-loads from the protesters.
The protesters are supposed to be protecting the environment.
The environment.
Wow, that's unbelievable. Well,
it just kind of, I was watching Tucker Carlson the other night, and he had the same sort of concept where they're protesting ICE in Portland. And these protesters come in and they left garbage, they left needles, they left all of this stuff, and nobody wants to talk about that, but who are these protesters?
And who's paying them?
Yeah.
That's a big deal. Again, this is national security, it's economic security. It is exactly why we have the economic war room, to bring you the truth about efforts to undermine our nation's economy and security, but also the good news and the good story that when we have pipelines like the one that Troy built and the Dakota Access Pipeline, it's the energy infrastructure we need to guarantee that you can get the fuels you need for your car, to fuel the electric grid, to create the products, and to keep America moving forward. This is what keeps our economy strong. And it's entrepreneurs and heroes like Troy Andrews who've made that possible. Troy Andrews and Paradigm Midstream is a perfect example of the energy infrastructure we need to develop. We're producing enormous amounts of energy in the Dakotas, and we have to get it to the place where it's needed to refine it or to ship it overseas or whatever. And we have to have pipelines to do that. So no wonder Vladimir Putin and others have attempted to fund environmental groups to stop the development of American oil pipelines. Now, for the first time in decades, we have the advantage in energy. We cannot squander it. And you as an investor can be part of funding the American energy success story. So what I need you to do is I need you to ask your advisor about investing in this. Noble Energy says that by 2020, we will need $272 billion worth of investment in new oil pipelines in the United States and Canada just to keep up with demand. So when you talk to your advisor, ask, number one, how can you best invest in the shale revolution? Number two, what is our energy investment plan if prices fall or rise? And number three, what will the Saudis do if they diversify away from oil? Energy is going to be a huge impact on all our investments, not just our energy investments. If Saudi Arabia diversifies away from oil, or if the dollar loses its reserve currency status, all of these will have an impact on your investments. And you need to have a plan with your advisor on how you're going to address it. But before you can talk to your advisor, let me give you a little briefing on being an intelligent energy investor. So when you ask your advisor what you should invest in, here's some things you need to understand. There are really three areas of energy that you can invest. We call them upstream, midstream, and downstream. Let's talk first about upstream. Upstream is E&P companies. That's exploration and production companies. Those are the companies that go out and look for oil, and they drill for oil, and then they produce it. And it's also those companies that serve them in that process. So generally, upstream companies benefit from higher oil prices, not lower oil prices. It's a lot more attractive when oil is $70 a barrel to drill for it than when it's 30 or 40. There are also a wide variety of E&P companies. You've got wildcatters and the small operations, and then you've got very large operations with strong balance sheets. There is a risk-reward ratio in investing. Sometimes when you take more risk, you can have the potential for better rewards. Well, the same is true in energy. If you invest in one of the smaller plays and they have hit it big and oil prices are strong, you can make a lot of money. On the other hand, if they come up dry, you can lose a lot of money. The larger companies tend to have more stable investment parameters. Here's a good example from the Motley Fool article in October 2017 that says the 33% plunge in oil over the past 3 years caused Sanchez Energy stock to crater nearly 80%, while ConocoPhillips stock is down only 27%. Well, in a big oil price decline, ConocoPhillips held up much better than Sanchez Energy. You can also invest upstream by investing in oil field services and equipment makers. They're also price sensitive, but think of this, in the gold rush of California, if you sold picks and shovels, you had a steadier investment and you were able to diversify a little bit. So oil field services are another way to invest upstream. There are exchange traded funds that invest in multiple exploration and production companies. And then, of course, the integrated oil companies, the great big ones, they have upstream, midstream, and downstream. They're integrated, meaning they have all three components. So upstream is where you'd invest if you think oil prices are going higher. Midstream is more like the toll booth of the energy superhighway. There's an enormous need in this sector right now because we're producing energy that a few years ago we never expected in North Dakota and West Texas and so forth. And we don't have the pipelines or the transportation infrastructure. So what's happened in a lot of cases is they put oil on rail cars and shipped it on rail cars. But we're developing pipelines and there's enormous need to continue to build those. And so the midstream investments would be like what Troy Andrews' company did. It was privately held, but it's what they did. They put a lot of money and built a pipeline. It's very infrastructure intensive. It's generally based on transportation, logistics, technology. And so it could be, midstream investments could be rail, barge, pipelines, or transloading. Transloading is a technical term when you take it from one mode of transportation to another. Maybe you take it from the drill site to the pipeline, and so you put it on a rail car and ship it and then take it off, transload it onto the pipeline to go where it needs to go. Now, one aspect of midstream investments is that they tend to be a little more energy price neutral. As long as there's supply and demand for, actually sometimes do better with lower energy prices, not higher energy prices. And that's because, let's say you're a fertilizer company and your feedstock is natural gas. If natural gas prices are lower, your cost of creating the fertilizer is less. And so you make more money, your margins can increase, and you can sell more fertilizer. Integrated oil companies also have downstream marketing opportunities. So integrated, you cover kind of all three of them, or you can focus on upstream, midstream, or downstream. And that's important because it depends on what you think is going to happen to the price of oil or American energy production. Now let me tell you, I started this part when I told you about the sand dune lizard, also known as the sagebrush lizard. Congressman Conaway actually helped broker a deal that allowed us to build up this enormous shale industry. The problem is that the environmental groups are coming back and they're complaining now that maybe the deal that was brokered wasn't good for the lizard. And so there's this big push. It started in May of 2018. We've got to stop using sand in these dunes that's being used in hydraulic fracking and a part of our shale. We've got to stop and shut down. And there is a big push and a lot of foreign money and interest and environmental push to get officials appointed that will stop hydraulic fracking. And because it's working so well, we've kind of stopped paying attention to it because you're only paying $2 a gallon for your gasoline in that range, $2.50, $3. You're not noticing how important our shale industry is. But as I mentioned, there's going to be 2 billion internal combustion engines on the planet in 20 years. To keep gas prices down, we're going to need as much energy development as we can possibly get. And so it's absolutely essential that we maintain a battle plan for protecting the American energy renaissance. Here's 3 steps in the battle plan. First, look to invest in America's energy security. Whether it's upstream, midstream, or downstream, there's enormous opportunities and enormous demand for capital. And Wall Street, this was hot on Wall Street a few years ago, but today they're always looking for the new sexy thing and they're not paying as much attention. We need that investment and it's essential. You talk to your advisor about ways to invest in American energy. Second thing, we got to vet our candidates. There are a lot of them trying to slip through pretending, well, I've done this and I've this, and they won't ever address their stance on environmental issues and the shale industry and fracking. Pin them down. Ask at every town hall. Go to the websites. Shout, because this is absolutely essential that we protect this. If we're going to win the economic war that we're winning right now, we have to maintain American energy production. And it only takes a simple stroke of a pen from the Fish and Wildlife Service to say, oh, it's an endangered species, to prevent you from getting affordable gasoline. Number 3. I'm inviting you to be an economic warrior with us. This is a battle I fought for 10 years. I'm inviting you to join me. Go to economicwarroom.com. There's a chance, an opportunity for you to get free trials and pass out to everyone you know and say, you've got to learn these things. America's at war, and this is different like any other war. It's different for 2 reasons. One, you're the target. Your life, your livelihood, your way of life, everything about you is being targeted. But number 2, you personally can make a difference. Remember, what we see as a marketplace, our enemies view as a battle space. This is Kevin Freeman from the Economic War Room.